Hello YouTube! This is a new series we're doing for the Opera Festival. Under the scorekeeping segment, we'll talk to you about the history of operas we'll have on stage, operas in general, and just talk about music that we love. It's all part of our education and outreach mission, so awkward, but we're not actually going to start out with these talking about an opera at all. Today, for our first episode, we'd love to dive in on The Mandalorian. Well, it's score anyway, so let's get right into it. The Western is an awesome, classic genre of film. Lots of these films have risen to box office and cultural fame, and even spun off niche varieties on the same basic idea. The space cowboy has become a well-known sub-genre of American film and sci-fi genres. And Disney Plus's The Mandalorian is a relative newcomer in that area. Western here refers to the American West, so the Western style is essentially a subset of the American collection of musical tropes and ideas. Europeans first settled the American West as the Spanish explored the New World and encountered all of the native peoples and nations, pushing inland, mostly at the tip of a sword, from their landing points in the Caribbean to as far north and west as San Francisco. As a result, a lot of composers trying to establish a musical sound for the American West incorporated elements to represent those groups musically, by bringing in their music, or else inventing or relying on pre-existing tropes to depict the American West. The famous opera composer Puccini actually wrote a cowboy opera as a commission for the Metropolitan Opera of New York, called La Fanciulla del West, or, in English, Girl of the Golden West. It was premiered by the powerhouse star tenor of the day, Enrico Caruso. I might be a little bit of a fangirl. Puccini incorporated his interpretation of a sun dance from the Zuni, a tribe in the region of modern-day New Mexico, as well as ragtime elements. There are bits of English sprinkled through the Italian libretto, and more. But though Andrew Lloyd Webber and others would later heavily borrow from this piece, allegedly, and it did have some notable arias, this opera was not to be definitive, and it's one among many contributions to this genre. It's perhaps a little bit of a signpost of things to come in a century or so with spaghetti westerns. The earlier example that really set the bar for trying to build an American sound, and which still influences Americana music today, is Antonín Dvořák's New World Symphony. In this piece, you can hear the composer try his hand at recreating a melody in the style of American folk and African American song. And he also made wide use of the optimistic major mode and sweeping triadic melodies, which would become a staple of the cowboy western genre. A lot of early Hollywood westerns relied on the bar Dvořák set. For instance, John Wayne movie scores are basically lush European romantic music with motivic references to those same Americanizing tropes. Listen to this bit of Dvořák Symphony No. 9. And now compare it to this theme from the film True Grit by Elmer Bernstein. You hear the references to American folk or African American music, Indian or native so-called music, and Spanish sounds. They're referencing composers like Defaya and Rodrigo's guitar and symphonic pieces, and music painting components too, like rhythms imitating horses galloping or light dingy percussion for boot spurs. It's also never without a section of those optimistic, sweeping, major triadic figures, as well as utilizing the sort of instruments cowpokes brought along with them, like harmonica, singing, and whistling. All these we think of as Western or cowboy music. Later westerns used more sparse, serious music to characterize a new take on the western genre, which was a lot less optimistic and a lot more gritty. We might call this the Clint Eastwood phase. The world was changing. Americans weren't the only ones making westerns by then. Italians had a flood of American movies after World War II, and that meant a lot of westerns. We had also already been in Vietnam for years by 1964, and the country was sobering up from the post-war boom. The early positivity of films was slipping in general, and westerns weren't an exception. In Fistful of Dollars by Ennio Morricone, we get an interesting reimagining of these tropes. It includes acoustic guitar and a whistly element, human voices, imitated percussion, but now all in support of a soundscape unlike anything John Wayne would have had on his movies. By the time of this film, we see the theme is composed in minor and with a generally much slower tempo. It also incorporates electric guitar, the new, edgy, cool guy sound which had been creating its immortal place in Americana for some years by then, and a driving beat more in line with rock than classic styles. This isn't the musically sunny heroes call to action of Dvořák or True Grit. It's a slow, deliberate theme for a cynical, violent loner, a non-hero. But to really dig into this, we need to talk about the ultimate in Western tropes. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Another Morricone, this is no longer a collection of simple tropes. The musicscape has definitely evolved. It's a mood now. A harsher, more cynical world with small major mode interjections that seem more fateful than optimistic. Now, it's not just a presentation of music you might hear if you traveled out west at a stirring cinematic peak. It represents a new type of leading man, not just someone who herds cattle for a living. Incidentally, Sergio Leone, who created both these films, was an opera fan, and people use operatic terms to talk about his work. He would even record the score ahead of principal filming and play it on set to create a mood for the actors. It's really cool. So turning to Star Wars, these movies have a certain cowboy westernism in them, particularly when we're talking about the underbelly and outer rim dimensions of the universe, like we see on Tatooine in the first movie, A New Hope. That wretched hive of scum and villainy includes bounty hunters, mercenaries, swindlers, and drifters. They are the outlaws in this galaxy, and the Han Solos and Din Djarins of this universe stand in for the Rooster Cogburns of early American westerns from our own. The Mandalorian, being a show that follows a bounty hunter, albeit one with a conscience, on Tatooine, is a deep dive into the frontier of Star Wars and requires that cowboy sound. But how would you adapt a Western score for our favorite sci-fi galaxy? Well, now we know at least how Ludwig Göransson would do it. Göransson's score uses sparse acoustic guitar, a driving beat, occasional orchestral interventions, and an electronic edge with the main theme, or motto maybe, it's fairly short, of an electric guitar wail. It's very much in the vein of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Lots of Western tropes, but with the distorted electronics and strategic sparseness to add edginess and modernity. The first sound of the theme or motto are largely just a small handful of notes, but they do a few things effectively. First, this motto tends to strike up out of silence or at critical moments of challenge or victory in a very stark way, like an auditory way to throw down the gauntlet. It also has an interesting acoustic timbre. The first section includes a low recorder, which I think lends it a grounded, sort of old sound. We see a lot of composers in film use instruments like this to effect. Hans Zimmer has often used the Armenian duduk.
I always wanted to use this one instrument for the Moroccan sequences called the duduk, which is thousands of years old. It's really an Armenian clarinet, would be the easiest explanation.
But Ludwig Göransson seems to be a specialist at using timbre to make his musical point. He does incorporate this motto motivically in his symphonic treatments throughout the episodes as well. There's some great dissection of this over at the channel Soundtracker, so check that out for a blow-by-blow if you want a little more detail. I'll leave a link for you. so you can still keep an ear peeled for motivic developments like we're used to in Star Wars. Speaking of John Williams and his thematic development, there's also the matter of the brass portion of this track. This could not be more different in terms of instrumentation and color from the loner acoustic motto which started out the theme. After that motto and motif is developed a bit, adding harmony, etc., it gives way to a light, dinging perfect fourth. It's a simple, succinct cadence which not only ends the last section, but sets up the next one, and with a little more momentum this time. But more importantly, this is a musical call to action. It quickly gives way to a driving beat and a super distorted electric guitar glissando. Now we start to hear a new theme in brass with lots of stamping, repeated rhythms. It's the first hint of a big old horn herald, and I'm a little obsessed with the way he ends it, this cool triplet figure. This is a classic Heroes theme, and it marks one big departure from Morricone's cynical leading man theme. A ceilingless, ascending sequence catapults us upward until we're suddenly planted in major mode with the full orchestra wailing away. The brass fanfare soars along with martial note repetitions while the strings play high, quick accompaniment, and the low brass digs in to counter on the offbeats. This is what heroism sounds like. We are going to do a video on this topic of just hero tropes pretty soon, so subscribe and be sure that you catch it. Don't want to miss that one. And this is where Göransson finally meshes his own timbre-heavy method with the symphonic, German romantic style we're used to hearing throughout Star Wars scores. And what's cool about this is that he's using sounds we know, like cowboy tropes or John Williams' previous orchestral work, as well as sounds we don't know so well in Star Wars, like the distorted instruments, less common acoustic sounds, all of that, as a way to tell us something about the character. The more we learn about Mando, the more his theme suits him. He lives in a strict, salt-of-the-earth moral code. Like a lot of other Star Wars characters, Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, he's a complicated, multifaceted character with flaws. But he's good where it counts, walking the line between cynical realism and virtue. And his music reflects all of this really, really well. This season coming up for The Mandalorian looks really, really good, and I've loved Göransson's work so far on The Mandalorian and other stuff, so this is going to be great. But what do you think of this music? Like it? Hate it? Need to set me straight on anything? And did you know there was a cowboy opera? Let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, you made it all the way to the end, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll see more when we do new things, and it really does help us out. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome and operatic day.